If you walked into a Rolls-Royce showroom today with a briefcase full of cash and asked for the cheapest car on the lot, the salesman would smile politely and quote you something north of $450,000. And that's before you've touched a single option, before the paint, before the wood, before the tiny stars stitched into the headliner by hand. At that point, you haven't bought a car. You've bought a down payment on a car. And the strangest part of this story hasn't even started yet. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Rolls-Royce doesn't really compete with other car companies. It doesn't chase Mercedes or Bentley on horsepower charts or 0 to 60 times. It sells maybe 6,000 cars a year worldwide, which is roughly what Toyota sells before lunch. And yet this tiny, slow-moving British company, quietly owned by a German engineering giant, generates more profit per vehicle than almost anyone else on the planet. So the real question isn't why a Rolls-Royce costs so much. It's why people are lining up, checkbooks open, to pay it without blinking. To understand that, you have to go back more than a century, to a chance meeting in a Manchester hotel in 1904. On one side of the table sat Charles Rolls, a wealthy young aristocrat who loved fast cars and had the money to indulge that love recklessly. On the other side sat Henry Royce, a self-taught engineer from a poor background who hated one thing above all else: unreliability. Royce had built a car for himself simply because he was furious at how badly made every other car on the market was. Rolls test drove it, fell silent, and reportedly said almost nothing for several minutes. Then he asked to buy every car Royce could make. That handshake became a company. Even after Royce passed away in 1933, even after 2 world wars, even after a bankruptcy in the 1970s that briefly forced the company into government hands. In the late 1990s, the family that owned Rolls-Royce decided to sell, and two of Germany's biggest car companies both wanted it badly. BMW and Volkswagen went to war over the deal, and Volkswagen won the first round, buying the factory, the tooling, and almost every physical asset connected to the brand. Champagne corks popped in Wolfsburg. But there was one thing Volkswagen forgot to check. The Rolls-Royce name and its famous winged badge weren't actually part of that sale. They belonged, quietly, separately, to Rolls-Royce's aerospace division, the one that makes jet engines, and that division sold the naming rights to BMW instead, for a fraction of what Volkswagen had just spent. For a few surreal years, Volkswagen owned a Rolls-Royce factory it legally couldn't call Rolls-Royce, while BMW owned a legendary name it had no factory to put it on. It's the business equivalent of winning the house in a divorce and then discovering someone else owns the street it's on. Eventually, the two companies negotiated a transition, and by January 2003, BMW had full control of both the name and a brand new factory built for exactly one purpose: making Rolls-Royce cars slowly, expensively, and without a single shortcut. That factory sits at Goodwood, tucked into the English countryside, surrounded by grass, trees, and, fittingly, very little rush. It employs around 2,000 people to build fewer than 6,000 cars a year. For comparison, a typical mainstream car plant might produce that many vehicles in a single week, sometimes less. This isn't inefficiency, it's the entire business model, deliberately engineered. Rolls-Royce doesn't want to make more cars. It wants each one to take longer, cost more, and feel like it was built by someone who genuinely, personally cared whether you liked it. Every single Rolls-Royce takes roughly 450 hours to build, and some bespoke commissions stretch far beyond that. A large chunk of that time isn't spent on the engine or the chassis at all. It's spent on details most owners will never consciously register, but will absolutely feel. Take the wood veneer inside the cabin. It's often cut from a single tree, split straight down the middle, so the grain pattern on the driver's door mirrors the grain pattern on the passenger's door, almost like a Rorschach test designed specifically for people who can afford therapy but would rather buy furniture instead. Finding the right tree, curing the wood slowly to avoid cracking, and matching the panels can take months before a single door panel is even installed in the car. Then there's the leather, and this is where the story gets genuinely absurd. Rolls-Royce reportedly rejects entire hides if the cow lived anywhere near barbed wire fencing, because a scratch from a fence, invisible to almost anyone, is considered unacceptable on a surface this expensive. Somewhere in the English or German countryside, there is a herd of extremely pampered cattle grazing behind soft rope instead of wire, completely unaware that their skin might one day cushion the elbow of a hedge fund manager mid-phone call. It sounds like a joke. It isn't. The paint process can involve up to 6 coats, each one hand-sanded between layers, and buyers can request custom colors matched to literally anything. A favorite lipstick shade, a childhood pet, a sunset photographed on one particular evening that mattered to them. One owner reportedly had the factory match the paint to a bottle of nail polish flown in specifically for the job. Rolls-Royce didn't blink. They just added a line item to the invoice, because saying yes is, quite literally, the product. And this is where the business model reveals its real cleverness. The base price you see in the brochure is almost a decoy, a low anchor point designed to get you in the showroom door. The actual money is made in what the industry politely calls bespoke, and what everyone else would just call upselling on a spiritual level. Want a starlit headliner, with hundreds of fiber optic lights arranged to match the exact night sky over your house on your wedding date? That's an option. Want a hidden humidor built into the trunk because you and your business partner enjoy cigars after closing deals? Also an option. In one of the most famous commissions in the company's history, a Rolls-Royce loyalist named Fenwick Cambray Smith spent over 3 decades commissioning a series of increasingly personal, increasingly strange one-off cars, culminating in a car whose entire design language paid tribute to his own yacht. It never got repeated. It didn't need to. That was the point. Individually commissioned vehicles like this, built once and never repeated, have sold for well over $10 million. The most famous modern example is the Sweptail, a single car built for a single anonymous client obsessed with 1930s coach-built Rolls-Royces and classic yachts, which reportedly cost somewhere around $13 million and took 4 years to design and build. Rolls-Royce didn't lose money on that car. They made it a headline instead, one that quietly told every other wealthy buyer on earth, whatever you're imagining, we can build that too. Which brings us to the psychology, and honestly, this is where the whole business finally makes sense. A Ferrari tells the world you like speed. A Lamborghini tells the world you like attention, possibly a bit too much of it. A Rolls-Royce says something quieter, and frankly a little smugger, that you've already arrived, and you feel no need to prove it to anyone in a parking lot. The cars are famously understated on the outside, almost boring by supercar standards, and almost absurdly indulgent on the inside, which mirrors exactly how a certain kind of old money buyer likes to present themselves. Old money doesn't shout, it closes the door softly, and the door, by the way, closes itself, powered by its own electric motor, because apparently even gravity wasn't considered dignified enough for the job. None of this comes cheap to produce, and the hidden costs are exactly where a lot of newer luxury brands quietly fail trying to copy the formula. Maintaining hand craftsmanship at this level means Rolls-Royce can't simply automate its way to higher volume without destroying the very thing people are paying for. Training a single wood veneer specialist or master leather cutter can take years, sometimes closer to a decade for the most senior roles, and if that person retires or leaves, you can't just post the job online and expect a replacement by Monday morning. The company also has to protect its reputation with almost paranoid intensity, because unlike a mass-market brand that can absorb a bad review or two, Rolls-Royce is selling trust at the highest possible price point on Earth. One viral video of a rattling panel or an uneven stitch could do more damage to the brand than a decade of glowing press could ever repair. There's also the engineering itself, which is far from cheap, even if it's designed to look effortless. The V12 engines are assembled with a level of precision that borders on obsessive, and the company has leaned heavily on BMW's much deeper engineering pockets to keep the cars competitive on modern safety, emissions and technology standards, all while making absolutely sure none of that modern engineering ever feels visible or trendy inside the cabin. In fact, Rolls-Royce goes out of its way to avoid looking cutting edge, because cutting edge ages badly within a decade, and timelessness is the entire point of the brand. A Phantom sold today is designed to still look completely appropriate parked outside a palace gate in 30 years, which is a far harder design target than it sounds, and one that has quietly bankrupted flashier luxury brands who chase trends instead. Not every chapter of this story involves smooth leather and starlit ceilings, though. For decades, Rolls-Royce genuinely struggled to define an identity distinct from its old sister brand, Bentley, since the two companies had shared factories, engines, and even body designs for much of the 20th century. During the uncertain ownership years before BMW took over, quality control reportedly slipped in noticeable ways, and the brand picked up a reputation for electrical gremlins and inconsistent build quality that took years of BMW's engineering discipline to fully repair. There have also been genuinely awkward moments where the brand's ultra-traditional image collided head-on with modern market realities. The clearest example came in 2018, when Rolls-Royce launched its first SUV, the Cullinan, and had to spend considerable effort reassuring a slightly horrified traditional customer base that yes, a Rolls-Royce could still be a proper Rolls-Royce even with a taller ride height, all-wheel drive, and the ability to drive across a muddy field. The gamble paid off. The Cullinan quickly became one of the brand's best-selling models, proving that even the stuffiest luxury institutions eventually have to bend, just very, very slowly. Perhaps the biggest gamble in the company's recent history is the one still playing out in real time: the shift toward electric power. In 2023, Rolls-Royce released its first fully electric production model, the Spectre, a car that trades the deep, ceremonial hum of a V12 engine for near-total silence. Depending on how you look at it, that's either the ultimate fulfillment of the brand's century-old obsession with quietness, or a genuine gamble with a customer base that historically skews older, more traditional, and not exactly first in line for new technology. Early reception has been cautiously positive, with several longtime owners reportedly saying the silence felt more Rolls-Royce than the engine ever did. But the company is essentially betting its next 100 years on the theory that silence, not horsepower, was always the real product being sold. So how profitable is all of this, really? Rolls-Royce doesn't publish detailed standalone figures, since its results are folded into BMW's much larger financial reports. But industry estimates suggest the brand generates well over $2 billion in annual revenue from fewer than 6,000 cars, based on figures reported within BMW Group's luxury segment disclosures. Profit margins at this level are notoriously hard to pin down exactly, but analysts following the luxury auto sector have estimated they can run significantly higher than typical automotive margins, sometimes reaching well into double digits that would make a mainstream car company weep with envy. When your customer base genuinely doesn't ask the price before nodding yes, margin stops being a math problem and starts being a design choice. Which brings us back to the real answer to the question we started with. A Rolls-Royce isn't expensive because of the metal, or even really because of the badge stamped onto it. It's expensive because a company figured out, over a century ago, that the ultimate luxury isn't speed, or flash, or even raw comfort. It's the feeling of being told yes, over and over again, by people who genuinely mean it. Every hour of hand-stitched leather, every custom-matched paint color, every quietly self-closing door is really just an incredibly elaborate, incredibly expensive way of saying, whatever you can imagine, we will figure out how to build it. And somewhere in the English countryside, a factory full of 2,000 extremely patient people is proving, roughly 6,000 times a year, that people are more than willing to pay almost anything for that answer.